with us in this extraordinary moment in the history of football. And I'm delighted to say it's our great friend, Henry Winter, the chief football writer of the Times. And of course, probably no one better to talk about Maradona with. But first of all, how are you, Henry?
Yeah, good. Going to matches without fans. I think I've probably done about 60 odd of them so far. And it's just, I mean, if anyone wondered about fans' importance before, they certainly weren't now. The clubs weren't now, because it's completely soulless without fans as well as noiseless.
Yeah, I mean, just one of the strangest years, probably imaginable. And I mean, obviously you've been able to go to matches now, and we see how you have somebody behind you there. Hi.
Cat saying hi.
How are you doing, Cat? I can recognise you there because the light was in a strange way.
You finished the cheese.
I did finish the cheese, yeah. So
This is almost too good not to leave
yeah.
in. But
yeah, leave in. Yeah, absolutely. There you go. I've eaten all the cheese. We're at that stage of lockdown where we're fighting over scraps of cheese.
Yeah. Well, remember last time I thought we were in Budapest, so you have to correct me on that. But yeah, extraordinary time. But you and the family well, I take it.
Good, yeah, all good.
Excellent.
All good. Yeah, and just like everyone else, just sort of marvelling at the key workers in the NHS who are keeping this country on the road.
Yeah, phenomenal job they've done. So Diego Maradona, Henry. I was thinking today, it's sort of it's a strange way to put it, but it's almost the biggest player death in the history of the game. If we think about the people who have passed and recently, of course. This is unprecedented, really, isn't it?
It is unprecedented. I mean, you don't really want to make a list of who's the biggest ones in terms of those passing away. But I think what's been very interesting in a lot of the tributes is that inevitably people are making a comparison and saying about Maradona, well, was he the greatest? And I think that if you compare, obviously, with Pelé, obviously slightly different era, but Pelé had 3 World Cups, but played with Vavar and Garrincha and Jairzinho and all these great players. Whereas Maradona, particularly for Argentina and arguably for Napoli, he wasn't surrounded by absolute superstars that of the current generation. Messi certainly has been. So I think all the tributes that I've read, everyone was saying, well, listen, he is in the top 3 with Pelé and Messi. But I think the more you look back at what he went through, what he experienced, what he did for Argentina in the World Cup, how he came back from the sort of tackles that, the butcher of Bilbao and Uruguay Cocher put in on him, the cortisone injections he had. I mean, a lot of people have been talking about the famous England game in the Azteca in '86, and people are focusing on the hand of God and wasn't that cheating, and then other people have been focusing on what an amazing second goal that was, the greatest World Cup goal of all time. And you've got to remember, in that game he took an absolute beating from England. I mean, how Terry Fenwick didn't get sent off. Fenwick could have been sent off about 3 times. There were some really pretty nasty challenges put in on him, as there were throughout that tournament, particularly the Cameroon game to start off with. And I think it's one of the reasons why FIFA at the end of it said, right, enough's enough, we've got to protect players more. So, yeah, I mean, he was, someone used the word, he was a brave player. He was always a brave player in terms of always wanting to play, always wanting to take the ball, even though he knew he was going to get a kicking.
Yeah, I mean, that was one of the phenomenal things that I think I saw a photograph, somebody taking of his legs after a game one time. I mean, he'd just been hacked, and I mean, it looked like balloons. His sort of calves were, it's sort of it's that great debate. Then were they greater than because of the physical pressure that they had to take? But yeah, I mean, and constantly in pain. He was supposedly, and of course this is where they think addiction might have started from all the injections, but I mean, describe for you if you can sort of distill it, what it was that he had technically that made him just such a phenomenal player.
I mean, I've been lucky to cover him as a player and as a coach. As a coach, I mean, his press conferences were hilarious. They were all tickets. They were just fireworks. And he was, even in training Argentina in 2010, I went and watched one of their training sessions, and he still had it. I mean, they were actually training in, I think it was Pretoria, but they were training at the Springboks, the rugby team's base. And, he's from the country of, obviously, Argentina, the Pumas. He knows his rugby. And he was walking back towards the pavilion, chatting to Aguero or Messi or whoever. And there was a rugby ball just lying discarded just on the pitch. I think so one of the junior rugby teams had been out there training. And he just almost nonchalantly, as he went past, he just sort of kicked it. It was lying down on the ground, obviously an oval ball like NFL, and it just sailed over the uprights for the conversion, as we'd say. So I just thought, oh my God, even if he turns to another sport, even though he's turned 50, he can still do that. But the skill of the man was just, I don't think there's been a more skillful footballer in terms of what he could do. And from a young age, the juggling skills, not just with that amazing left foot, on his thigh, on his heel, on his shoulder, on his head, he would just sort of bounce the ball all over. If there was one person you wanted to juggle for your life, it would be Maradona, ahead of Messi and Pelé and Ronaldo, because that left foot was just unbelievable. And if you look at some of the footage of that game, the Mexico City game, Azteca, the pitch was pretty rubbish.
Yeah.
And there were some moments when actually, rather than risk putting the ball on the ground, he would sort of juggle it, keep it up. And there was a few games in Italy where there's a downpour in Napoli, and the pitch was so bad that he would just juggle the ball from the halfway line and then volley it in the net, because you just couldn't risk it on the ground. So, in terms of technical skill, for me, there was no one better.
Really, you would say he was yes. I mean, he and that ability that we perhaps haven't seen. I'm hesitant, because to say that Messi and Ronaldo, haven't imposed themselves on games is ridiculous. But at that highest level in the tournament, it's that debate, isn't it? Until you win a World Cup, should you be included in that list? But his ability. I mean, I think the most recent player to be able to do that at international level, arguably, was Zidane, who seemed to be able to just take control of games, and if his team weren't performing, he just seemed to march them through himself. But the way that Maradona could impose himself on a game was just unprecedented and phenomenal, wasn't it?
I mean, Zidane was surrounded by fantastic players with France. I mean, obviously Zidane was head and shoulders above them, but still, he had Thierry Henry, Patrick Vieira, Pires, players like that, phenomenal players. Maradona, particularly with Argentina, I mean, there were good players in that team, Valdano, Bushaga, and players like that, but no one in Maradona's league. And he just, that England game, he took England apart twice. One illegally, okay, but one. To be honest, the second goal was worth two. I mean, it was just that brilliant. And and these weren't Park players he was going past. This was Terry Butcher. This was Peter Shilton, one of the best goalkeepers in the world. And Peter Shilton very rarely died. He very rarely went to ground early. He was quite confident. He stood his ground, almost playing a game of blink or bluff with the opposing striker. But Maradona put him down and then put the ball in.
Yeah, I mean, that final part, almost the way he squeezed it in with his left foot, is just. I almost like it just goes on. It just goes on its own in there. But you have to see it from a different angle. Yeah, I mean that's obviously an iconic game, and I always remember. It's strange. I was doing a bit yesterday, and I remember watching it, and the thing I always remember was the reflection, that strange silhouette, which turned out to, was it a PA speaker system or something? It looked like a starburst, and it just always is etched. He started that run, the sort of pirouette that started it, which was just incredible in its own right. It was right next to that, and it just we always seem to remember that.
It was like a shadow of a spaceship, and in a way that was fitting, because Maradona almost came. Well, he was otherworldly in terms of his skill. But I think it's quite interesting, because you look at it from an English perspective, and whenever he's come over to England, whether it's commercial events or seeing fellow Argentinians at clubs here, the English reaction to him has always been pretty much ecstatic.
Yes.
Despite the sort of the headlines, and I think most of the headlines in the tabloids, even in the Times, mentions, Maradona's now in the hands of God. At some point we've got to move on a bit.
Yeah.
But the English audiences, I've been at 2 or 3 matches where he's been introduced on the pitch at half time, and it's been the reception's been, incredible. He'd have got an even bigger reception up in Scotland, having done what he did to England. But yeah, I just think, and that's the testament that even though he left England broken-hearted and feeling cheated, everyone appreciated his skills so much that you saw the outpouring of emotion yesterday, and obviously in around the world, but clearly in Naples and in Argentina, where I think they're having 3 days of national mourning. That's and Andre Villas-Boas, the coach, came out with a suggestion that FIFA should retire the number 10 shirt, which I think that's a bit mad.
Yeah.
I think what number 10, which he embodied, what you want is kids to inspire to be the next Maradona, to be the next great number 10.
Yeah, if anything, it's an advertisement to keep the number 10 going, because he made it that. Yeah, it is going to be incredible to see Argentina. I think even talking about a state funeral, and for them, again, I'm not sure if there is anybody in modern history, in or out of sport, that has had is more of a culturally significant to the country.
Muhammad Ali. If you, I think there's certain American boxers. Not on the same level, but Lewis Hamilton,
yes,
what he's doing. I think there's and I think it's increasingly commonplace now. You're seeing it with Marcus Rashford, again, different level, who are using their sporting, awareness, where people are of them as sportsmen, that they're using it for, the betterment of society. So Maradona, he didn't always do things for the betterment of society. They're often the betterment of Diego Maradona. But in terms of the joy that he brought Argentina, I think it's wonderful what the Argentinians are doing for him, and the outpouring of emotion. And I know quite a few of the Argentinian sports reporters, television and print, a few radio. And these are men and women who sort of travel the world, pretty hardened journalists, and they were emotionally broken yesterday. Maradona, even if he'd shouted at them or whatever, I think he waved a gun, didn't he, at some journalists once? I think there was just. I just think everyone feels that they've lost part of their childhood.
That's exactly. That's exactly the same thing. It's like I hate you, but I kind of love you. It was that thing where it almost over the years it seems like the unforgivable thing that he did to us. How could a player do that? An English player would never think of doing such a thing like that. To then sort of over the years, this sort of falling in love almost with that second goal. Whereas it's painful to watch. It's such a thing of beauty that the pain and the beauty side of it, the beauty is sort of won out in the end.
Yeah, and I think if you look at sort of any genius in any walk of life, many of them have that dark side. Many of the great artists, many of the great composers, chess players, whatever area you want to stray into, it's a fine line between madness and genius sometimes. And look, Maradona crossed the line, but you could also say that he was dragged across that line, as you say, in terms of the cortisone injections, in terms of the challenges put in on him, in terms of the company that appeared around money, around football, particularly in Naples in that period.
Mm-hmm. Of course, absolutely. Where were you that day for the quarterfinal?
The 86, the Azteca, I was at the office at the Independent. Mm-hmm. The first World Cup I did was Italia 90, but I was fortunate to see him there, the Brazil-Argentina game, Dele Alpi, when he played an amazing pass to release Caniggia through. Mm-hmm. And my other memory from that game is that he absolutely got kicked to bits, in 90. It was just horrendous. But yeah, no, it's an absolute... it was great just to have seen him live in his pomp in 90.
Very, very envious of that. And then, 90 was kind of against all odds again. Nobody gave him a hope really after the Cameroon game. But he, again, I remember that semi-final against Italy, the famous story where Neapolitans would say we didn't know who to cheer really because he was such a god in Naples, wasn't he?
Yeah, he said probably one or two things before the game which they might have construed as anti-Italian, and that sort of, when the Azzurri is concerned, they're going to support them. But you've only got to see the recent film about Maradona in Naples to realise just how embedded he was in society there, and I mean just phenomenal. I mean, the fact that they're changing the name of Estadio Sao Paulo to from St Paul's to a footballing saint, Diego Maradona, just shows the power of the man.
Yeah, absolutely. And then of course, after that, sadly, the downfall in USA '94. I mean, you've touched upon it. The demons were never far away, were they? And his body, started to sort of gradually fail after that, and you sort of compare the strength of his body. Is sort of 5'5", but just the stocky, just like a mini tank almost. But then the fragility of it later after he stopped playing.
Well, he kept on putting the wrong things in his body, and it's sad, and but maybe he came from such a difficult background in terms of not necessarily so much his family, but in terms of the streets that he grew up in, and it's to suddenly have the whole world just treating you like a god, women throwing themselves at him, commercial sponsors, clubs, autograph hunters. He was just mad around him. So I mean, even things even when he was 50 and a coach, to actually see his press conferences were almost like religious services. They were almost like frenzies when he was there, when he appeared. I mean, he was a godlike figure. I don't think there's anyone who compares in English society at the moment. I think it'd be very difficult to find someone of his who just absorbed and attracted and was revered by all stratas of Argentinian society.
Yeah, and from what I hear, and you confirm, the sheer charisma of the guy was on a different level, wasn't it? But
remarkable man. I mean, if he'd be the smallest person in the room, and he would just have the biggest personality. I mean, that was him, and also that was his reputation as well. His reputation precedes him. You're thinking, my God, I am in the presence of complete greatness. Yeah, and there was also, I think, what added to the legend was just some of the bonkers things that happened in his life. Some of it self-inflicted, some of it inflicted on others, and then the human story about denying that he had a son who eventually went to see him, and there were Proximo there. And it's interesting, you're just listening to people like Ozzy Ardiles in the last sort of 24 hours talking about how good he was to them, how he listened to them, how he tried to help them if they ever needed it. He sounded quite a kind, generous person as well.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny. I've been hearing the same things. Just so many sides to him. Complex individual, wasn't he? And as you say, genius often comes with these side effects, if you want to call them the dark side. What will be? I mean, this might be difficult. Your sort of abiding memory of him. I mean, there's the obvious answer, of course, but perhaps I should say outside of that 90-minute game in Mexico City. I think you always go back to games that you've actually witnessed in the flesh. I think they just have so much more. It's like the difference between an album and a gig in a way. I just think the joy of seeing him in the flesh again, just hot conditions against a bunch of Brazilians who just wanted to basically dismember him effectively, and him just sort of dancing through them and just creating the goal for Caniggia. So yeah, that's a memory burned into my consciousness. And if I twist that round, can you see on the door? You see the Italian 19? Yes.
Yeah. So I picked that up that day in Turin, wandering about. It's just discarded on the road. Nice
little find. That'll be auctioned off for millions. One day. Just sign it.
Yeah.
I'm sure today you've written about him in the Times. Our viewers, I'm sure, would like to know that, they can read your piece about him today? Or
yeah, I mean, if you go across how many English newspapers, daily papers are there now, then 8 or 9, and there are, I think it's 55 pages of tributes to Maradona. I think he's on the front of most of them, obviously on the back. I got a call from my boss around sort of 4:30, 4:45. Just said, listen, we're clearing everything. Yeah. That nice piece you wrote on something else, that's gone. Now just deliver us a retrospective on Maradona. And I actually think, no consolation to his family, but I think the media has done it proud. I mean, I just, listening to Gary Lineker last night on BT, listening to Ozzy Ardiles on the radio, reading all the sort of tributes to him. And the front pages, I don't know if you've seen L'Equipe. The L'Equipe's front page is just, it's the angle of the shot. He's a very photogenic individual. And if you're a photographer, smaller players you get better photographs of them than larger ones, because you can frame it more easily, you can get other things in. Not that I'm a very good photographer, but I hang around with a lot of photographers, and they say we much prefer taking pictures of smaller players. And just the headline in L'Equipe is Dieu est mort, God is dead.
Yeah.
You just read that and you go, blimey.
Yeah.
And I guess they're right.
And that gives us a sense of, this is perhaps the biggest death we've experienced in modern football. So, Henry, thank you so much. Everybody, check out Henry's piece about Maradona. It'll be probably the god amongst pieces about Maradona. I would think.
Honestly, there's so many good pieces out there. Just have a trawl through Twitter. There's a good one in the New York Times by Rory Smith. There's there are loads obviously in the English publications, and sadly my language isn't good enough to. I had a look at the French one. The French tributes are great, and obviously Naples is another city in mourning, and their media's reflected that.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Henry, thank you so much. I can imagine you are just swamped at the moment with this, and I so appreciate you taking the time out to talk to us about this incredible figure in football and in sport in general.
I will always talk to the one journalist who got to Leuven in Belgium and put the rest of us to shame.